This is your fortnightly instalment where I interview a trailblazing physiotherapist that has shaped the profession we are today. In celebrating their journey, knowledge and insights, you gain the opportunity to plan and guide your own professional journey. My name is Doug Carey and welcome to Physio+10. Welcome 2023, past and previous listeners to Physio+10. Special guest to kick off this year for our first podcast is Randall Cooper. Welcome, Randall, to Physio+10.
G'day, Doug. Thanks so much for having me on your podcast.
Absolutely a pleasure. Hey, look, we don't go through a big intro on the person because the idea is that we learn about you as we go along. So if we could just sort of start with a bit of background about where you grew up and what your early schooling involved.
Yeah, well, I'm the son of a motor mechanic and a school teacher. The great thing about I had a terrific upbringing, and the one thing I think I learned from my parents is they had their own motor repair workshop. So Dad basically started his own mechanic, and I learned business. I learned that how hard it is to essentially to build it, to keep staff, to make sure it was profitable, all that kind of stuff. I was there. I saw it warts and all, and I think that really set the tone probably for part of my career and my journey. So I'm sure we'll talk about this as we go on. I'm one of two boys. My brother's kind of in the auction industry, so something completely different. And I'm the eldest child there. So I grew up in Melbourne. I had a terrific private school. Music was one of my things, but I love sport as well. And that's one of the things that kind of led me to physiotherapy.
Well, with that background, that brings two things to mind. One is just recently chatting with Paul Wright, and I was asking him the question, like with regards to reception and hiring staff, what's the number one thing that his mastermind group looks at? And I sort of said, is it education? Is it experience? He said, no, actually, we've found out that it's people that have grown up in a small business environment. They are the ones that understand the importance of engaging with their client, as a receptionist or as a physio. And I thought, you've just hit the nail on the head there as well. Like, to be successful, you almost need to have that understanding of what small business means when it comes to helping your patients or helping your caseload or building a business. So it's kind of interesting you brought that up as well. Hey, I was going to ask, given that you don't have a health background in your family, where did physio come in for you?
Well, I've got quite an interesting story. What led me to physio, and I won't go for too long, but I had a very difficult year when I was 16. I was a keen snow skier, and I was up at a training camp at Thredbo in New South Wales, and I blew my knee. I jumped off this rock and landed awkwardly, and I did my ACL and I did my MCL at the same time. And this was back in the 1990s, so I needed an old school ACL reconstruction. So I was like 6 weeks non-weight bearing, limited motion cast. It took me, a long time to rehabilitate from that. And that was the first bit. The second bit was, that was, I think, in July. And then in September, I started to have anesthesia, paresthesia, weakness, lethargy kind of all over my body. And the diagnosis was Guillain-Barré syndrome. So I was 3 months post-op from ACL. I had Guillain-Barré syndrome. I found myself in intensive care in Austin Hospital, almost about to get intubated. And I spent 3 or 4 weeks kind of in the hospital. And then it took me probably about 12 months to kind of completely rehabilitate from both injuries concurrently. Up until that point, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I remember even when I was in year 10, I was trying to convince my parents that I wanted to quit school and to go and be a chef. And fortunately, they kind of talked me out of that. Nothing wrong with being a chef, but it definitely was not my calling now that I'm a bit older. But it totally opened my eyes. This experience was actually a positive in my life, and it totally opened my eyes up to medicine, to physio, to health, to fitness, and it gave me the kick up the bum that I needed to actually really study hard, because my grades and the feedback at school for me was always capable boy, could apply himself more. And when I kind of got back to school after the ACL and also the Guillain-Barré syndrome, I was just motivated. So physio was the thing that I wanted to do. I wanted to make an impact on people's lives like those health professionals did to me. It really affected me deeply. And even today, like I still think it's one of the big driving forces of why I do what I do today.
So you had that major inflection point very early on in your life then.
It was, and in some ways, I'm glad that I did, and I've carved out I'm pretty proud of my physio career. I've spent a lot of it in sport, and it's uncanny that like I've seen a lot of high level athletes, Olympic champions, AFL footballers, etc. The ones who make it, usually not all of them, but like a lot of them have to deal with something fairly significant in their life, to kind of get the grit and the drive, to achieve great things. Not everyone has to do that, but you'll find if you dig into people's stories enough, usually that's there. So, like you said, like I was fortunate to have that at the age of 16, and the fire's still burning, mate.
Yeah, when you say that, and being a West Coast supporter over here makes me think of Chris Judd and how he had his sort of bilateral shoulder dislocations, and he got picked up by the West Coast fairly cheaply, so to speak. But he had some grit and determination to get over those two things, and with appropriate guidance and rehab, obviously went on to have a very successful football career after that period as well. Which physio course did you choose, and like how did you find studying?
So when I applied for physio in Melbourne at this time, like there were only two physio courses. There was the one offered by, well, actually, I got entry into Lincoln, if you remember. It sounds very old now. They changed into La Trobe. So that was the Lincoln course, was like the original physio course all the way back to the 60s or something, in Melbourne. And it was only a couple of years before I started, Melbourne University kind of opened up their course as well. So there's Melbourne and La Trobe. And we were actually down the road from each other. Like Lincoln in these days was in Carlton, Melbourne University was just up the road as well. So we all knew each other. We actually studied anatomy together. So in a lot of ways, it was kind of like one big class. But it's different now. Like in Melbourne, I think there's at least 10 physio courses. So it's an interesting choice and challenge for people who want to study physios these days. But I loved university.
Yeah. So it was a 4-year degree, like we had gone from the diploma to the degree at this stage?
There's a 4-year Bachelor of Physio, and it was at the Lincoln, or ended up being La Trobe, or Lincoln Institute of Health Sciences. And so it was a small kind of building in Melbourne, in Carlton, and we had physio, occupational therapy, speech pathology, podiatry, I think, and a bizarre one, medical records administration. And I think all the courses had at least 80% female to male ratios. So it was a wonderful to kind of study in that environment. I jokingly say it was almost like high school with alcohol, because it was still that close and everyone kind of knew each other. Like all the balls and stuff were a lot of fun. So I got a lot out of the academic side, but I also got a lot out of the social side as well.
Yeah, no, it's pretty special, those. Hey, and when you were doing your study, was there any particular lecturer or mentor that sort of, I mean, you said you had this experience with Guillain-Barré and also the ACL injury, but is it at this point you're starting to realize that sports is the direction you're heading, or is there a person that influenced you in that direction?
No, at this point in time, like, because I had, it was an interesting kind of journey into physio, as I said, and like the physio that I experienced was a private practice, because of my ACL. Like initially, I went into private practice and did the routine kind of. Well, back in those days, there was the electrotherapy roundabout. It's changed a little bit now, but I went through that. But when I kind of had a neurological condition, I was very much in hospital physio, ortho neuro, and then I went to outpatients at a rehabilitation facility. So I thought it was actually really quite unique that I'd been exposed to so many areas of physio before I got in. And when I kind of started to study, because I'd had such, and it was reasonably recent experience, like I was 16, 17 when all this happened, and I was 18 by the time I started studying. So I just lapped it up. Like as anything, I just wanted to learn as much as I could. I found it was probably my favorite subject was anatomy. And for those that are around about my age who studied medicine or physio at Melbourne around that time. There's an anatomy professor called Chris Briggs, and like Chris just was awesome. Like I just loved anatomy. I love Chris. I just couldn't learn enough from that guy. He didn't really influence like where I went clinically, but I feel like I've still got a good understanding of anatomy because of like his personality and the topic combined.
Yeah. And when you finished, like, was there a particular, I'm trying to think about what I remember when graduating, but for you, what did it mean actually getting that certificate in hand and graduating as a physiotherapist?
It was very satisfying. It's something that everyone dreams of when you're going through your studies. Like getting your qualification is really important. It did feel a little surreal. I think also I remember two bits. It was actually three parts of it. Thinking back, the first one was the realization that you passed. So you got through that last exam, and it's like, okay, I've done it. The second one was actually then registering as a physio, and then with APRA, and then this, the certificate coming back with your number on it. It's like I'm good to go. Like this is really fun and really cool. And then the third one, obviously, is kind of getting that first job. And I suppose in some ways, I found the transition not easy, but maybe a touch easier than others. Because I did have that interest in sports in undergraduate, during my undergraduate studies, I worked fairly hard as a sports trainer. And some of the football teams that I work with, I was the only guy there. So every single player used to come to me with their injuries, what to do. And as you know, like nothing beats experience. And I felt that by the time I kind of got into my first job, it's like, all right, I've been here, done that. I've got the certificate now, but I just need to up my game a little bit. I've got a little bit more time. I've got to be a little bit more professional, but at the same time, like I felt like I'd done this before. So the transition was okay.
Yeah. I think that speaks to a lot, even for new grads thinking about that now or going into graduation. If you do say a sports medicine level 1 trainer course and you start providing your services as you're going through, then the transition when you actually move into private practice and you start seeing patients one-on-one is not such a big transition. The room changes a bit, but the professionalism changes, but the actual meet and the greet and the professional sort of standards, I think, helps a lot when you've had a lot of patient contact before you actually become a fully fledged therapist.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I had it was a very interesting kind of first job that I got, because one of the physio that actually I kind of worked for, in inverted commas, as a sports trainer, he was the one who kind of was the team physio for these football teams, generally, that I worked with in my third and fourth years in my studies. When I graduated, like, which was November or something like that, I think I got my my APRA certificate in December, and he said, I want to go away for 2 weeks of holiday over Christmas. Can you please run the practice?
Yeah, I can see where this is going.
And it's like, you're kidding me, aren't you? Like, I've literally, the ink's still drying on like my certificate. And not only do you want me to see a full caseload of patients, like you actually want me to do the books, do the phones, all this kind of stuff. And this isn't out the back of Whoop Whoop where you get 4 patients a day. This was in Brighton, in Melbourne, so, it was a busy clinic. It was only a small clinic. There's only a few practitioners, but I was the only person there. So going back to what we talked about small business, like this, not only from a clinical perspective, but from a business perspective, was an absolute baptism by fire. And geez, I slept well for those 2 weeks every single night. I was exhausted. But after that, like obviously, like you either it either kills you or it makes you stronger. And I think it made me stronger. So yeah.
Okay, so going forward, you graduated, your ink's dried, you've had your baptism of fire. What were the sort of things that what other jobs did you take on in the next few years? And particularly, were these conscious decisions, or did you tend to just move from a job to a job for other reasons?
No, it was an interesting first 2 years, because I felt that eventually I'd wind up in private practice and eventually I'd wind up in sports. But I also felt that I needed to get some more grounding and be part of a bigger organization and learn more about the medical system and work in the hospital system for a while. So I worked for the private practice for the first 3 or 4 months. I actually took my time to kind of, wait for all those new grad jobs to kind of go. And then an opportunity came up at a rehabilitation hospital out in the southeast of Melbourne. And that was a full-time job. So I took that. And there was a rotation kind of through the acute hospital system. I continued to work at the private practice Monday, Wednesday, Friday nights from 5 to 8. And then I worked also in the private practice from 9 to 12, and then covered a football game in the afternoon as well. So you can probably pick up that I was pretty motivated new grad. And it was good, it was, I was busy. It was really nice to start earning money. And I thought it also would give me the opportunity to really see if truly it was that I wanted to kind of go into sports. And I think that it was a really good process, because what happened was that I spent about 9 to 12 months working in the hospital. And then after about 6 or 9 months, the hospital actually had a research unit that specialised in gait disorders of neurological conditions, particularly Parkinson's and Huntington's disease. And it was headed up by Meg Morris. So I'm sure a lot of people would know and know of Meg. So Meg approached me and said, listen, I need some research help. Would you like, I'll pay you more than like what you're getting paid kind of in the hospital. Would you like to come and work for me half of your hours? And I said, well, this is just a great opportunity. So I did. And I worked in this research facility. I conducted studies. I shadowed Meg. Meg was a big influence on my early career. And after about 6 to 9 months of doing that, Meg came to me and said, would you like to go to do a PhD kind of like on some of these topics? I can offer you essentially like a very unique opportunity where I'll pay you and you can stay on the same salary that you are at the moment, but you can combine it with doing a PhD, and you'll come out as a doctor and a specialist in neurological physio. And I was doing this as well as the private practice stuff, as I was speaking about before. So it was a big fork in the road for me. And I think that, we kind of, just before we started, we were talking about these progressions kind of like for younger physios. And it really was like my first major decision, because I felt that neurological research opportunity was significant. Meg was awesome. She still is, she was very inspirational. But, the question was, is that really where my heart lies? Is that really what I want to do with my career? And I ended up saying no to Meg and to doing the PhD for free, basically. And I decided to double down and to go and focus my energy on being the best sports physio I could. But like my appetite was also whet for doing research and making a difference there. So I enrolled to do a Masters of Research at La Trobe University, and it might be no surprise to anyone that I picked ACL rehab as the topic that I wanted to do. And I designed and started and did some studies on ACL rehab. So it's interesting how these things kind of play out. But yeah, that fork in the road was another great kind of learning experience for me in my career.
Yeah, well, as I said, it made you come to a conscious decision, like you had to sit down and ponder what you wanted to do and then act on that rather than perhaps drifting along from one thing to the next.
Yeah.
Was that when you did your masters? Like you said, research, but you did it also in sports, didn't you? Or was that a separate qualification you came to?
No, I actually didn't do the traditional kind of Masters of Sports Physiotherapy. I did a Masters of Physiotherapy and Research, and I did that. I did two or three studies. It was actually a really quite significant degree. And I remember when I kind of handed in my thesis, which was about 30,000 words long, that my two reviewers said this is a PhD quality. So I didn't go as far as you, mate. So I haven't got the PhD, and but that's fine. But yeah, and since then, like I've had an interest in research. But the interesting thing it did was, and this is I think something that would be good to talk about with you and your audience today, is that this research made me unique. I didn't kind of, just have the same qualification as everyone else and, a good reputation. I had a unique degree in a niche area, and almost not quite overnight, I became the ACL guy. And what happens is that when I did this and I started doing the research and I did my first study, and I started to network with the orthopedic surgeons, Peter Bruckner and Karim Khan, because I worked at Peter's clinic, said, we're about to do the second edition of clinical sports medicine. Would you like to write the chapter on ACL rehab? And it's like, I didn't feel ready. It's like, but you don't say no to these opportunities. So I said, yeah, I'm ready. Like, I'll do it. Just tell me how many words you want me to write. So I did. And the combination of kind of having that kudos and then and writing the chapter in that very famous textbook, literally set my career up for the next 20 or 30 years, because I just became the guy who kind of was the expert in ACL rehab. Didn't feel like I'd earned it, but at the same time, like, I got that kudos. And like I'd never had problems filling my patient list, from that point onwards.
Yeah. So would you say though that it actually made you, or was your client list pretty much then 90% ACLs? Is that sort of what you then saw?
At that point, it did. Like I got to probably, once I got to probably about 30, so I was about 8 years out, I'd finished my degree. Sorry, I'd finished my master's degree. I think that probably 8 out of 10 of patients were ACLs. And I got to the point that, like when I saw a wrist or a hand, I'd just I'd put the white flag up and just say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to charge you for this. Here's a bandage.
I'm not sure if I know what I'm doing here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. I guess the next progression, and I'm not sure if we're going to jump around a bit, but you said you did your master's in the research focus. Then you've progressed on and doing your specialization. And that's another huge step clinically and psychologically challenging as far as commitment to a process. Why did you decide you needed to do that, given that you were literally the ACL guru of Melbourne?
I did it like in the really early days of specialization, and I was another person that I was kind of fortunate enough to work with and come across was Henry Waswalner. And so Henry would be known well in the sports physio kind of world, and he worked at Olympic Park where I did at the time. Henry was the first person in Victoria to become a specialist sports and exercise physio now. And I remember he's got a very dry kind of persona and terrific man. But he just bailed me up in the clinic one day and he said, Randall, you should do specialization. You'll romp it in. And I said, he goes, well, there's a grandfather clause at the moment. Like there's an exam in like 6 months. If you study hard, I'll help you to train you up and do the program. I think you'll pass. So I thought about it for a few days, and it's like, okay, I'll go for it. And one of the things that kind of got me there was just how quick it was. Now it's like a 2-year fellowship training program. But I thought, I may as well go. I've got nothing to lose. I did actually, because I think the exam fees were like $3,000 or something like that. So it's like, if I stuff this up, my wife won't be happy about that. But I remember there was only me and one other candidate, and that was Leanne Raft. And so we went together to be the second and third kind of specialist sports physios in Victoria. And one of my vivid memories was that it's like, okay, the way we're going to get, this is Henry said, the way we're going to get started is we're just going to start with a live patient. Randall, you're first. And like, I'm going to assess you start to finish. I'm not going to say anything. You just got a live patient. You got to assess them, treat them, and then give them some stuff to do. So I did that. Took about 45 minutes, half an hour. And his comment was at the end was, that's a great start because it couldn't get any worse. We can only get better from here. And it's like, I've got so far to go here. And it was a massive thing. I thought it would kind of be something that I just kind of like, yeah, okay, they'll just do it. But it ended up being a lot of study, a lot of work. But I got over the line, and yeah, I'm pleased and proud that I did.
Yeah, no, I think it is a massive challenge, and like you sort of said, they make or break you, these things. So it's a good thing. Now, you just slipped in there. You were married at this stage, and your wife was going to, I don't think you said cut your balls off, but it was close to it. How did you meet your wife? When?
So my wife and I met. One of the sports that I was very passionate about and wanted to work in was the sport of skiing. And actually, I forgot to kind of drop this in before, but during that time when I was working at the rehab hospital, also in the private practice, and with the football teams, was that I also went and got myself a position up at Mount Buller at the snowfields in Melbourne, or in Victoria, sorry. I think I was 2 years out, maybe it was my third year out, and I ran the physio clinic up there, and that was a great experience as well. You got as many injuries from the pub as you did from skiing. People just slipping over when they've had too many. So I actually met my wife up there. She came up. She was from Perth. She came over and moved to Melbourne. She had a bunch of friends and girlfriends that she went up to Mount Buller for opening weekend. This is the second year that I worked up there, not the first year. And we were introduced through friends. She didn't really like me to start with. She thought that I was quite obnoxious. And then she, interestingly, then she came to see me the following day at the practice. And I remember actually going back to uni days. They a couple of the lecturers said it's uncanny how many physios marry their patients, and I have to say that I adhered to that philosophy as well. So we met, and we ended up getting married.
Oh, that's cool. Hey, look, I'm just changing gears a little bit. I'm guessing what started as was a side hustle for you has grown into a fully fledged business. I'm talking here about PreMax. How did it start?
So PreMax started. It was all the way back in 2006, and I suppose just kind of backstepping, just really briefly, like when I kind of made that decision to be a sports physio and to specialize in knees. But it was a specialty in knees. It wasn't 100% specialty in knees. I decided that I wanted to go to Olympic Games and also work with an AFL team. So I did. I got those jobs. I worked with Hawthorn. I went to the Winter Olympics with the Australian Winter Olympic team. And what I noticed was that there's a lot of manual therapy back then, and particularly kind of like in sport when you're traveling and working with teams as the physio, like, and you've got a lot of hats. You're psychologist, your massage therapist, your occasional doctor, your counsellor, and your physio as well. And invariably, I just got so many complaints about from the athletes about these creams that you're using on me are greasy. I don't like them. They don't feel nice. Why don't you can I actually get my treatment before the game, like an hour before it, so I can go and shower to get that stuff off me before I go and play or train. And the other thing I picked up was that also working kind of in the clinical environment at Olympic Park, where I worked, was just down the road from our city, from our CBD. So we get a lot of office workers who are into their sport would come down and get treatment at lunchtime and stuff. And they would actually say something really similar. That they would, they'd say, "Thanks so much for your treatment, but like, I just, can you get that cream off? Like, is there a shower or something? Like, because I don't want to put my suit back on to kind of go back up to the office. I feel terrible." So, I went home and actually spoke to my wife about it and said, "There's something here. Like, everyone just keeps complaining about these oils and creams that we use, and there's no other alternatives. They're cheap and nasty." And like she said, why does it have to be that way? Like, I love my moisturizer. I love my hand cream. Like, skincare can be terrific. Like, why don't you do something great? So we discussed it over a few weeks, and she had some Qantas shares that were tanking. And it was like, I might have been 10 grand or 15 grand or something that she had in those. And Jane said, like, I want to invest in you. Why don't you do this? Why don't you actually start a couple of massage creams? And maybe what we can do, it might take us on a holiday to Noosa each year, or to Bunbury, or on Margaret River. And I said, okay, I'm going to go for it, because as much as like I was thoroughly kind of enjoying being a physio in elite sport, because that's really what I wanted to do. Probably, from my upbringing, I had this little entrepreneurial, business itch that I'd like to actually kind of create something as well. And I toyed with the idea of, buying shares into the clinic, or do I, try and start my own clinic, and then this came along. It's like, okay, I can have my cake and eat it too. I can still work in elite sport. I can do this as a side hustle. Maybe if it earns me $30,000 or $40,000 a year, what a win! Like, unbelievable. So that's where it started. It started off just with 2 massage creams, no marketing budget. All we did was basically I engaged 2 wholesalers. I gave them a bunch of product to start sampling out with clinics, and that was the start of it. And here I am, like 15 years later, and it's much bigger than that now. So it's been a great journey.
Yeah. Now, with any sort of business like that, like, there's a point in time where it goes side hustle, stays side hustle gets bigger. Like, again, we use this word inflection. What was the inflection point for you to suddenly go from 2 products and not staying with 2, but going to something obviously and significantly bigger than what it is when you first started it?
So it grew over about 7 or 8 years. It just organically kind of grew. It went from 2 products, and we went up to 5, and they're all products for health professionals, massage therapists, physios, osteos, chiros, etc. Just massage creams and lotions, basically. And there's a couple of things that happened. The first one was that the products started to travel overseas. So a lot of, particularly the physios who would get postings with Premier League teams or NBA teams, or sometimes they were, teams in Asia, they would either take PreMax with them, or we'd get an email or a call saying, we can't find anything like your stuff in the UK or the US or whatever. Can you please send those creams over? Budget is not an issue. We'll pay whatever you want us to buy. And it's like, wow, that's really interesting. And then the second thing was, we then also concurrently got feedback from athletes, because the athletes would say, we love actually getting treated with your creams, because it was solving the problem that they were complaining about, that I spoke about a couple of minutes ago. But why don't you do something for us? Like, we can't find a sunscreen that, doesn't sting our eyes. And, like the anti-chafe balms out there, they don't work properly. And, we got a bunch of these. So I got to the point, that these 2 pieces of feedback kept coming back. And then I also, as I kind of got more experience in business and product development and business opportunity, I looked at the opportunity, and I kind of saw essentially white space in front of this brand. Because when I opened up the medical cabinet at Hawthorn Football Club, like, we had one brand of tape, like it was Elastoplast and Luco, and that was all there was. But then the other part of the cabinet was all these creams and lotions and oils, and it was literally 50 different companies. And it's like, why doesn't someone own that? Why can't there be one brand that does that really well and actually lead and define, skincare and gels and creams and lotions for sports people? So I sat down, this is about 2016, 2017, with Peter Bruckner, who's a long-term friend, colleague, mentor. He'd just come back from his stint working at Liverpool Football Club. And I said, I just told him about that situation. And I said, what do you think I should do? And he said, I think you should go for it, mate. And if you want an investor, I'm happy to be your first ever investor. So Peter put in some money into the business, and it was at that point that was a huge point in my professional life. It's like, I still consider myself very much a specialist sports exercise physio, but I'm gonna pivot to becoming a business guy now. And I did it. I've kind of been on the roller coaster since. So yeah, it was an amazing turn of events, and yeah, but not one that I regret by any stretch. It's been a terrific journey.
Yeah. And look, for people that have a business itch or they've got an idea that they think has capacity to grow, I know it's a bit of a broad question, but do you have any bits of advice that you'd give them to consider when they step off into that direction?
Yeah, I think so. I think that particularly for physios, like I've actually, you know, because I pay attention to the businesses that other physios do, and you know, I've seen a few succeed and I've seen a lot fail. And I suppose for anyone that's thinking about this, you know, I've got a few pieces of advice. The first one is um, keep it small, like to start, like kind of test. It's no different to kind of the way that sometimes you'll treat. Like sometimes you just got to test something, try something out, reassess, you know, and then if it works, then okay, you can start to scale it up and do it more. And I suppose you know that was what I learned with PreMax is I started small. Yes, there was a point where I had to invest $10,000 or $15,000 or something in like that. But you know, I said, well, you know, if I blow that, then you know, we can make it up. My wife's a lawyer. I'm a physio. Like we can, no worries. I don't want to die wondering. I think that the next thing is that, you know, particularly for physios, if they've got a business thing, is that everyone, you don't know what you don't know. And when you're talking about stuff like marketing, operations, financial management, all this kind of stuff, like it is a foreign language just as much as we're talking about, you know, supraspinatus and, you know, all the medical terms. Like when you get into business speak and try and understand channel, when you're trying to understand, you know, return on advertising spending and what's good and what's not, it's a completely different game. So if you're going to go into business with anyone else, go into business with someone who's got complementary skills. And I've seen this all the time in physio is that generally like physios go into business with physios. And it's like they all sing the same from the same hymn book, but they don't bring complementary skills. So I think that that's really important. Be really clear on your goals. You know, like and I have to say that I changed my goals because my goals, like with PreMax, was for it to be a very healthy lifestyle business, and I achieved that. Then you reach that the top of that mountain, then you kind of go, what's next? Um, but you know, you see a lot of conflict where some people think that they're going to be the next Apple or Nike, and other people just want that to be that lifestyle business as well. So if you're going into business, whether it's just by yourself or whether you're going in with others, I think it's really important that you're crystal clear on what you're trying to achieve, so there's no conflict there. And I think the last thing, and it's probably the most important, is that you know the world has got so much stuff. So if you're actually looking at doing something that's, you know, whether it's a digital product or whether it's, you know, like a physical product, like I've got, for instance, you the only way that business will cut through if it's unique and different and needed. It needs to be something that's needed. So that's where you know research kind of comes into it as well. You need to understand. You need to do analysis with the market to realize whether this is going to fly or not. And if it's a product that you can start off small and cost you a couple of $1,000s and you can continue to scale it, that's great. But if it's a digital product, you want to do an app or something like that, for instance, and it's going to cost you $100,000 to kind of do it, you know, like you really need to understand that, you know, like you've got a really good shot of that working, you know, before you invest that kind of money. So it's not easy to start a business. Most of them fail. But yeah, it's if you get it right, it can be unbelievably rewarding on a lot of levels.
Yeah, cheers, Randall. Thanks for that. Because I mean, they're, you know, insights from the coal face, as you might say.
Yeah.
With your day being so well, not with your day, but with your, I guess, with the many fingers that you have in different pies, like how is your average day spent?
Doug, I don't have a typical day. That's the thing is that's both good and bad because you know particularly with you know Premax and we can talk about the learn.physio thing as well. Is these things progress and the things that I was doing 5 or 6 years ago, like you know if it you know you look back to when it was a lifestyle business, like I was literally just taping boxes and sending it out of my garage you know, I'd spend 80% of my time. I mean, even I used to put the boxes of cream in the back of my car and drive them to the wholesalers for them to go and sell. And that was the majority of my time. now, like, I'm managing my staff, I'm raising capital for the next investment round, I'm meeting recruiters, to kind of get to hire the next kind of talent. I, it, and that will change again, another year down the track. Like, I'll do more of that. Unfortunately, like, there's the thing I miss about physio and seeing a list all day, every day, is that there's very clear, like, times where you start and finish. You see your first patient at 9 o'clock, you see your last patient at 6 o'clock. You go home and you can switch off about it, knowing that you've got a list to do tomorrow. But for me, these issues, like, are continual, and never ending. So you find that you see those business wankers for a bit. They're always on the phone, or typing emails and whatever, and that's kind of me, unfortunately, at this stage. So I'm hoping that, like, as I progress, that I do less of sitting in front of a computer and less time talking on a phone, and more time spent with people.
So the people that you're spending time with, are they clients, or we just have moved off the complete treatment paradigm altogether now?
At this stage, I haven't treated, like, a live patient for a couple of years. I was, up until the start of COVID, I was doing a few sessions kind of at the clinic, hanging in there. And then when COVID came along, I thought, the other practitioners are really going to, like, there's not going to be much work. Everyone's going to shut up shop and stay home. And so I said, listen, I'll leave my sessions for now. And then it kind of got 2 years later, and I hadn't gone back. I've been kind of so busy, that I haven't been doing that. But with the learn.physio thing that, I'm doing with Mick Hughes, that's a wonderful outlet, for me to stay current and up to date with, what's happening, kind of like, in sports and musculoskeletal medicine. We're putting courses and stuff online. Pretty much all of them I'll sit in. I'll work with the presenters to talk about their content, what's in there. I've got a honorary position at Latrobe, at LASM, at the Latrobe Sport and Exercise Medicine Research Centre. So, I'm part of that, and talking research and whatnot there. But I haven't put my hands live on a patient for a while now.
Hmm. For $200 or less, what's the best book or app or tool, or there are other investment that you found helped you with your clinical development?
I'd have to say it's clinical sports medicine, the textbook. I know that there's some cool apps out there, and it's a little bit different for the younger practitioners kind of coming through now. But when I was cutting my teeth in, early days, I remember vividly so many times that I'd have a patient that had knee injury or ankle injury, wasn't 100% sure what it was. I'd excuse myself, and I'd rapidly go into my room and read through, like, thinking, okay, that, and that. Okay, I think this is what it is. These are the treatments, and I'd rush back out to my patient, and it's kind of like, I think I know what we're dealing with. So I found that book, enormously useful. It's still updated, it's still current, and I think that anyone who's into sport and exercise medicine should still have that book kind of on their table.
Yeah. Agreed. What would you say is the hardest lesson you learnt as a physiotherapist?
Oh, that's hard. I think that um, I think that I think the lesson I learned was that your career, and particularly, like, at a smaller level, like your patient list, is totally up to you, and it's not for anyone else to shape it. And I think that the hard lesson that I learned was that when I worked at this small private practice in Brighton, I just kind of picked up the pieces there for, like, the year or two that I was there. I worked from 5 to 8. Everyone in those days, everyone came in 5 to 8, so I found it reasonably easy to kind of get new patients. And because it was a suburban clinic, and with a good reputation, like, it was busy enough. I got enough patients. When I went and started working in Olympic Park, I then went to do it basically full time, and the payment system structure was just a commission structure at that stage. And I thought, this is Olympic Park. This is the most famous sports medicine centre in all of Melbourne, if not Australia. And surely I'm just a walk-up start to have a full list because everyone's clamoring to get into this place. And I think the first week I had like 4 patients. And then the second week I had 5. And then the third week I had 3. And then the fourth week I had 9 or something along those lines. And they were just fill-ins for other people. And it got 2 or 3 months down the track and I still wasn't busy. I was probably only 20% full. And the realization hit me hard is that if I'm going to create this list and I'm going to create myself as a practitioner who's the go-to guy, I've got to do it. I've got to do it myself. Like, this isn't just going to happen. I could go out and go back out to another suburban clinic and see backs and necks all day and whatever and be reasonably full, but that's not what I wanted to do with my career. So it was a really hard lesson. And, it was a hard lesson financially because I went from, as I said before, I had the full-time job at the hospital. I had, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday mornings as a private practice. And I went from that to zero, basically, and it took a while, and it took me a full year, if not more, to kind of build that patient list up. But then I suppose that was the benefit of what I felt that at that point, because I'd developed that specialty in knees, because I'd built myself as the go-to guy, not the clinic. It's like I felt very powerful that I could, no matter where I went in Melbourne, people would follow me at that point. I'd have my referring practitioners would still refer to me. My current patients would still refer and talk to more about me than the clinic. And I felt that at that point, like, I'm glad that I did it tough. It was a tough lesson, but it was a valuable and worthwhile one too.
So what you're saying is that after 2 or 3 months at Olympic Park, you realised, or you weren't aware that coming there you wouldn't have any patients. So you then had to go out and do some particular types of marketing exercises to develop that list and that referral base?
I completely had to build my own list. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really important point. So I think whilst it's nice to have the support of the clinic, it's also important to realise that you're actually developing yourself and your list and you as the professional for that particular type of service that you're providing. It's interesting you still had to do it at Olympic Park though, because I would have thought you'd walk into a pretty busy environment where they were looking to have somebody fill that sort of spot.
Well, you did, but at the same time, like, there was a lot of great physios in there who had their niches. So, if it was a neck injury, the receptionist and a lot of the referring doctors and practitioners would send it to the person who specialises in necks.
Yeah.
And the same went for hips and lower backs and whatever. So basically, without kind of like that special interest, you were there just for the scraps, essentially. That's the wrong way. I shouldn't have said that. But you were there for people who didn't need specialty treatment. And it's either, kind of fight or flight, basically. And so I fought and yeah.
What sort of 3 things in your professional life so far stand out for you as career highlights?
The first one is going to Olympic Games as a physio. I love the sport of skiing. I was obsessed with kind of being an Olympic physio. It's something I really wanted to do. I'm going to show my age here, but I'd started working for the national team. Must have been about 98, 99, and then the 2002 Winter Olympics were at Salt Lake City. And I thought that I was a really good chance of going to that Olympics, and I missed it. I didn't get it. They took 3 or 4 other physios. I was dejected. Elisa Camplin was a friend of mine and a patient, and I watched her win the gold medal kind of like on TV. So I found that both unbelievably great, but sad at the same time that I wasn't there. So to then go and actually then to kind of just work at it and keep doing it and be there for another 4 years and get to the 2006 Winter Olympics and be there was enormous for me. I felt really proud. I was lucky enough to walk in the opening ceremony with the team, and so that was a massive moment for me. The second one is passing specialisation, and even though I told the story that it was a whirlwind kind of 6 months, it was very satisfying kind of getting the letter in the mail saying that you'd passed, because I think it was only like a 50 or 60% pass rate at that stage. And I had so much respect for everyone else that was kind of doing it. So to kind of get past that, Rod Whiteley was my examiner, so he's not easy to get past. And so I found that kind of super great as well. And this one, I hope you don't find this too corny, Doug, but the last thing that, I've probably found most satisfying in my career is when I've had patients at the end, particularly because I see them with ACL rehab, for instance, for a long time, is when they give you a heartfelt thank you and look you in the eyes and said, "You've made a big difference to my life." Like, it's something that, like, even now that I'm focusing on more business stuff, you just don't get that. And, I go back to my story of like how I felt like when health professionals helped me when I had my problems when I was 16 and 17. And my passion and my drive was to try and do that for others, and achieving that and seeing them kind of either give you a bottle of wine, or you've had some of them cry, saying you've just made such an impact on my life, is a dream come true. It's been awesome. So they're the three things.
I don't find that corny at all. I think that you hit the nail on the head. You said physios, before we came on air, are basically altruistic people that perhaps get caught up and they don't realize that you have to have that compassion and passion, but you also have to have the business sense to survive as a physiotherapist, because if you're not essentially making a profit in your business, you can't provide the compassion and the passion to help people. So
right.
I think that third one is critical, because if you don't have that, if you don't enjoy that hug from the 85-year-old lady that's able to walk with the grandkids again, or you don't enjoy getting that little slice of chocolate cake from a teenager that's just done home ec and they're able to play the game of basketball grand final, I think those are the things that, well, for me, and that maybe I'm corny as well, but I think that's what really makes the profession that we are today.
Agreed.
And probably all the way through. Hey, if you could get in that old time machine and travel back in time to yourself when you're just starting out as a physio, would there be any bits of advice that you'd pass on to yourself now that you know what you do know?
Yeah, I think probably the first one I'd say to my younger self, and also younger physios, is first of all, be patient. Good things take time. I remember you probably picked up that I was super keen when I was a young physio to kind of cut my teeth and get, and I think I was probably about a year or kind of 18 months out, and I'd already done the level 1 sports physio course, and I managed to snag a spot up in Sydney for the level 2 sports physio course. And I reckon I was about, like I said, about 12 or 18 months out. And I did. I was so excited to go there. It was a 5-day living course up at NSWIS, up in Narrabeen. And I remember there that when I did the course, I regretted it, believe it or not. And the reason I regretted it is that it was like a brick in the face. It's like, I'm not ready. Like, because, every single presenter that got up there would say, when you kind of get these difficult patients to do this, this, and this, and everyone would kind of nod their head and just go, yeah, 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 yeah. Like, I get that. It's like, I haven't seen any of those, and then they'll talk about, and everyone remembers this study, and this study, that it was kind of like, I don't remember those. So I wasted that course. I wasted it because, like, I was just too impatient to kind of trying to get to where I was going. And, it wasn't the money really, it was just the opportunity of actually learning from those great practitioners at that point. So I think that experience counts for so much. And I'd encourage, like, my younger self and anyone younger to be patient and to kind of take time to kind of build your skills. The second is I'd recommend to myself and also others is to build your personal skills as much as your clinical skills and the soft skills. Particularly kind of like everyone at Olympic Park, when I was there was an excellent practitioner, but not everyone was full. And the reason, I think the thing that I recognise reasonably quickly is that the practitioners that were most full usually were the most caring and the most likable and the best people. And they were able to kind of interact with their patients best. They're able to reassure them well. They're able to explain things well. And I think that that's such a massive skill in what we do. We spend a lot of time with our patients, and if you can't articulate your message and make them feel warm, trusting, and completely kind of uh, confident in your ability and what you're telling them, then you're wasting kind of everything else you're doing. So I think your personal skills are as important as your clinical ones. And then I think the last one is, and we touched on this kind of, before we kind of turn the recording on, but I see so many kind of young physios that get about 3, 4, 5 years into their career and they get really flat, and they just feel like there's no way forward. It's like, I just don't want to keep seeing 50 hours of patients week in, week out. Where am I going to go? And we see them kind of bail and go off and do other things. I think that my advice is you need to actively think about putting yourself into a position of progression and growth. You need to kind of make sure that where you are is not in a position of dead end. And it's not necessarily where you work. I think it's also about a mindset that, it's like, am I going to go and do, my master's degree? Then when I've done my master's degree, what kind of things do I want to do? Do I want to work in sports? If so, like, how am I going to get that job with the VFL team? How am I going to, then work my way up to AFL? I want to do research. How am I going to do that? I want to own my practice one day. How am I going to do that? And I think that, like, so much focus comes on just management of a patient and your clinical effectiveness, and not so much about personal growth and building yourself up. And it's very different in the business world, for instance, that there's just a very clear trajectory and ladder, like in the corporate world, that it's easy for people to do. It's more difficult kind of in health, and particularly in physio, and particularly in private practice. So I think I'd really encourage, like, my younger self, I think I did it well actually, but for other younger physios is to make sure you don't feel or put yourself into a dead end, and that you're in a position where you can grow and progress.
Yeah, so essentially you're saying I'm doing this because, like, it's fulfilling a particular goal. It might be to gain clinical skills in a particular area. It might be to develop your business acumen because you're doing a course, or it might be working on a particular mentor that has a particular skill that you want to develop as well. So, and I think that by having a goal, like if you articulate it to yourself, you've got a goal and that you're working towards it, that tells your brain that you are moving forward. But if you don't have a goal, you don't have a map, well, you're going to get lost anyway. So I think that final point, it might sound exceptionally mature for a young physio to be considering, but it essentially means you are going to be moving forward in your own mind with what you're doing. If you're moving forward, you're going to be enjoying it. I think, like you say, if you get into a position, you feel you've got no lateral movement, you can't go up, can't go down, and you're stuck, even that mental cognition of being at a dead end, it's pretty down. It's pretty hard for your brain to accept that and to keep excited about being therapeutically positive for your patients as well.
I agree. There are some unique, I should say though, there are some unique individuals out there that are just happy to see a full list of patients week in, week out, and they get a lot of satisfaction from what we were talking about a little bit earlier, and just helping people, and they're very content in doing that. If that's you, then great. Like, you don't, like, if you're happy with that and you're going to be happy doing that for the next 10, 20 years or whatever, awesome, because there are those people out there. But my experience is most people aren't. Most people do want to continue to grow and progress, and physios generally are very smart people. And, kind of feeling like you're in a rut can make you feel pretty lousy.
Yeah, and I think, just as a bit of a plug for Physio+10, I think if you listen to the interviews, you'll get the sensation that there are many ways to grow. Like, whether it be in your own clinical development, in, doing some research, joining a professional association, becoming more involved in your community through health education and awareness, developing a product. Like, there are lots of things that you can add to your current knowledge that can stimulate your brain. And it's interesting that you get to one thing and then that leads to another too. So I think if you have got that forward-looking progression, like I as an individual want to improve in some way, there are many ways you can do it. It doesn't have to be, like academically or financially, but there are many ways you can develop yourself and make your, professional life a lot more exciting as well.
Yeah.
Hey, a couple
totally
more
agree.
questions before we wrap. One is like, what would you like to see our profession do, become, or go as far as in the next few years?
I think that, over the last 20 years, physiotherapy has done an outstanding job of applying research and evidence-based practice to like the way we do what we do and the way we do things. And I think that that really differentiates us from a lot of the other allied health professions. So I think that this will just continue to kind of, like progress and be increasingly more important if it's not that already at the moment. So that's kind of one. I also think that, like physio generally needs to kind of expand its scope. And I know like the APA is, talking about extended scope. It's hasn't really kind of cut through a lot. But if you look at over in the UK, for instance, some physios can do injections, and like I think that there's a role for physios to be able to image more, to prescribe certain drugs like like the podiatrists do, for instance, possibly do kind of injections of either local anaesthetic or cortisone to take the pressure off the medical system. I think we've seen over COVID that, like it's just under the pump and you just can't get to see GPs is what you must do. And I think physio has got a really great base for people to learn and progress more. And I think that ties into some of that stuff where, we're talking about, progression, career progression as well. That if this is something that's kind of made a major stream pathway, then you can continue to progress yourself, not only by being a specialist, for instance, but also kind of extended scope kind of work as well. I think they're the main ones that I thought about. I think the last thing also, and it kind of ties into, what we spoke about before is, sometimes it's not only about just, like people not progressing kind of through their career for kind of fulfillment and career progression, but also financial progression as well. And I'd really like to kind of see, particularly in the private practice market, that if we can get that cohort of more people who don't kind of bail out of the profession when they do get 4 or 5 years out, we got a lot more people who are 20, 25 years out, and they're rewarded for that financially. And we've kind of got the courage as a professional group to kind of charge a little bit more and to make sure it is a financially rewarding career for clinicians as well. I think that we'll see the entire profession lift because of it, because we'll have a more experienced workforce. It's uncanny how many physios just don't want to kind of talk about money or fees and their time for effort and this type of thing. But it's an important consideration because every other professional group isn't shy about it, but for some reason ours is. So I'd really like to see that conversation about pay and financial reward for being awesome at what you do kind of come more to the forefront.
Yeah. Do you have any ideas on how that could occur?
Well, no. Like, I mean, when I say no, like I'd probably need to qualify it that I've given this some thought, and I give it a lot of thought because like I see it that when it comes to like the solution behind it, I think that I'd probably need to understand a lot more about the governing bodies and the influence that they have and that kind of thing. But I think generally, and I'm starting to see it now, kind of like in inner Melbourne, that people are starting to charge more for their service and more for their services as for experience as well. And the clinics that essentially, got a tiered kind of payment, that if you're a graduate physio, this is the fee. If you've got a master's degree, this is the fee. If you're a specialist, this is the fee. If you're a guru, for a better word, this is the fee. And, it's no different to law, to accounting, to any other professional group. We've just been shy about it, that just physio is a commodity and that, like every session should be the same, but it shouldn't. And people should charge for their expertise. So I think it's happening. It's happening too slow, but I think that those people who are doing it well should probably start to, encourage more others to do it properly.
Yeah, I think there's almost like a tipping point because, as you say, every other profession does do it. And when you go and see the partner of a law firm, you know you're going to be paying $800 an hour, and you know if you're going to see the junior or the receptionist, you're just going to be paying a couple $100 an hour, and that's you don't like it, but you know that's the structure because you're paying for experience and qualifications, and it does seem almost retroversely bizarre that you have a specialist that's charging as much as a new grad because they say, well, people don't value my skill, and they'll go to the new grad. And I think that we as a profession need to educate our clients quite openly to say, well, this is why I am charging more. Because unless we take that, bull by the horns and explain it like we do with explaining persistent pain, or why a tendon takes 3 months, 600 days, or whatever it is to get to a point of maturity, say 300 days, we're not doing our job. And I think explaining why we charge what we charge is also part of that important process of educating the public about the services that we provide. If we're not confident ourselves, well, they certainly aren't going to be confident about that.
I think also that, a tiered kind of structure and also a tiered approach to patient management in clinics of a certain size is something that we should look to as well. So if you use the law example, it's like, yeah, you got your QC or your SC or whatever that will charge you $1,000 an hour, but they'll say, listen, I'm only going to do 6 hours of work, whereas I'm going to get the grunt work done by my associate who's only $350 an hour, right? And it's like, but you feel, okay, you're still, from a consumer's point of view or a patient's point of view, you still feel like, okay, the guy, the expert is still caring for me, is looking after me. But the person who's kind of doing most of the day-to-day work is charging me a lesser fee. And I feel good for that because I'm getting the best of both worlds. And financially, it's not so bad, but I'm still getting expertise. And I think that when you think about, the management of a difficult patient, for instance, like in a clinic, that model could be the same. If you've got a specialist, for instance, who sees them once a month, and then you've got a new grad or someone who's just doing their master's who, kind of supervises and progresses the rehab program, and then works in kind of like with more of a mentor situation as well. It's great for the patient. It's great for the younger therapist. It's good for the experienced, physio, that they're not just doing the meat and potato work that they've done for 20 or 25 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, just finishing off for yourself, where do you see yourself? What are your big focuses, your goals for the next few years?
Oh, I think I'm just really kind of happy and busy, kind of, just building my businesses up. And it's not only just, financial, just want more money and more revenue. It's also about, doing it better. The world's changing really fast. So you've kind of got to keep up there. I think though that, I graduated in 96. So, I'm only a few years away from being out for 30 years. And I think that, I see it in myself, the transition where I've still got some things that I want to achieve personally, and I've got some career goals and things that I'd like to do. But I also feel like, the time's kind of coming where I'm starting to give back more, and I'd really like to think that, I mentor more for the staff that work for me, that I'm there to help and assist and be there for them, rather than just kind of worrying about myself. So, it's kind of giving back. And that includes clinically, that includes at a business level, on all sorts of things. So I think that over the next 10, 15, 20 years, I'll still work hard, but a lot of that will kind of be starting to mentor that next generation.
Great. Well, all the best with all that, Randall, and thanks very much for spending some time on Physio+10 and sharing, a bunch of your insights along the clinical and the entrepreneurial and the mentoring sides of things that you're doing. It's been really good. So thank you very much.
I think your podcast is just terrific, Doug. I think that, the tone that you're setting with it is really good, because I think these are important issues to kind of discuss, and, good luck with everything that you do too.
Thanks very much, Randall. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Physio+10, in which I trust you gained some valuable insights. It'd be awesome if you could leave your 2 cents worth as a review or rating of this podcast, and I look forward to sharing the story of another trailblazing physiotherapist with you in 2 weeks' time. Stay safe. Bye for now.